like church, there's seats in the front. I'm Jean Collar, and I'm the Provost and Academic Vice President here at John Carroll. Our President, Robert Niehoff, is at a congregation meeting, but he sends his very best wishes and salutations, and I know that he would be thrilled to be at this particular session because it's being run by one of our native sons, Dr. Fred Pestello, who is the president of St. Louis University, formerly the president of Lemoyne, but a John Carroll graduate with degrees in sociology and ultimately finishing a doctorate in sociology, moving to the University of Dayton for a good close to quarter century, and then to assume the presidency as Lemoyne, one of the first lay presidents of Jesuit universities, and now to one of our most important universities in the Jesuit consortium, St. Louis University. Today, Fred will be talking about making Jesuit values in a moment of crisis, and we know what that moment of crisis is, the crisis that was Ferguson. But that crisis, of course, is also Cleveland and New York and Baltimore and places smaller and unfortunately perhaps more places to come. Some of the local iterations of this crisis may be different. The legal issues may be different. The policing issues may be different. But nevertheless, they all call from us, particularly as men and women who serve at Jesuit universities and elsewhere, to form a response that is born of our skills, capacities, and commitments. As a university community, our skills are, of course, analytical, intellectual, informed by years of research, situated within paradigms perhaps not as well known to the lay person, but useful and able to be inflected with the current moment. That is the stake of universities that are Jesuit and Catholic around the country and around the world, to use that abundance of learning and that openness to learning to inform the practice of justice and to see our knowledge as indeed instrumental to create a better world. I want to say two further things before I turn the microphone and the course lecture over to Fred. First, I discovered when I was reading more about Fred that he's the author of a book called, with a co-author, Sentiments and Acts. And this is a book which examines basically symbolic language, the what we say and the what we do. Now, I'm a professor of English, but frankly, one of my colleagues, who was a truer English professor than I ever was, said to me, "Jean, you think you're a sociologist." Because the formative text of my intellectual formation as a post-colonial scholar was Kenneth Burke's symbolic language. Language is a means of symbolic action. I did not know that, in a sense, Fred and I share a very common intellectual grounding, but that grounding, and I am first here to say he is far more accomplished than I am, but that grounding is not only a moral sympathy, but an intellectual sympathy. And the task of us as educators is to align moral and intellectual sympathies, right? And to see that that which we study, which can be so formative, can be extended through our teaching, through the classroom as that crucible of social analysis, whether through cultural products as I do, or whether through social events or behavioral events, which is more the domain of a social scientist. But to see that that is extended and embedded and lived within our students as an analytic frame that will engage empathy, and that most important of values, compassion. We also have our colleagues, all of you in this room, to further educate us in the matters of heart and analysis. And we need to be grateful to them. As I look around, I think of what Rich Clark has done in convening this conference as the fruit of many years of social analysis and ethical commitment. I see my colleague, Dr. Terry Mills, who is our newest colleague, but who reminds us of the calls of victims and of compassion and of just response. So that's what we are here to talk about today and to listen to Dr. Pestello talk about. So there's a sympathy that comes from intellectual grounding that crosses distances, and all of a sudden you look at someone and say, I understand you. You're my comrade. You're my colleague. Yeah, that's a wonderful thing. I hope that happens for you in this conference. The second is that we at John Carroll so admire what Fred has done at St. Louis University. Imagine that your first year in the job is this year of public scrutiny, of an intense call to sort through quickly difficult issues of fairness, of safety. And we have watched with admiration and frankly not a fair amount of pride that our colleague has done so well in trying to effect a lasting reconciliation from the events and a lasting understanding from the events at Ferguson. But how could we expect that someone who had written a book called Sentiments and Acts would do anything less than what he has done? So with admiration and a great deal of esteem, let us welcome Dr. Fred Pestello.
Thank you, Jean, for that very gracious introduction. It is an honor for me to be introduced by the provost of this fine institution. I also want to thank Dr. Clark for inviting me here. I am very pleased to be here at this conference which focuses on the values in which our institutions are grounded. And it's a privilege to be in front of this audience. Drs. Schmidt and Miller were instructors of mine when I was here just a few years ago. I grew up in Shaker Heights. I went to St. Dominic's School, then on to Shaker High, and here to John Carroll, graduating in 1974. For you younger people, automobiles were invented at that time, but not many of the other things with which you'll be fidgeting as I speak. I really am pleased to come here and simply tell what I think is a very important story. A very important story which is grounded in who we are as Jesuit institutions. I'm pleased to have some SLU students and staff here in the audience, some John Carroll students and others from Jesuit institutions across the country. I particularly want to thank Jeff Fowler, Vice President for Marketing and Communication, for coming out to assist me with this presentation. Jeff, like all the VPs at SLU, don't trust me to do anything on my own, so they always make sure there's at least one of them with me. Usually there are two or three. What I'm going to talk about is, what do you do when a crisis hits? How do you respond when the pressure is on? Let me tell you, as you'll easily understand, as people in administrative positions understand, as college presidents understand, when anything happens, but particularly a crisis happens, you want to move swiftly, quickly, decisively, to figure out what's going on and how do I solve it. How do I stop this? How do I stop this quickly? How do I prevent the damage? What's going on? How do I stop it? That's where the pressure is. Let's move swiftly. Let's move decisively. Give me the facts. I need to make a decision. I want to make a decision as quickly as possible. I want to minimize the damage. So often, when you follow those pressures and follow that normal logic, you find yourself going down a path swiftly, a path for which there's a lot of support that could lead to disaster, could lead to the exact wrong thing to do. So last October, my leadership team and I were moving down that path swiftly. But we were smart enough to catch ourselves and stop, to change course, to begin to think of how we respond in line with the mission of the institution we were serving, to go to our values and base our actions on those values. Let me tell you a little bit about the background that led to the crisis we faced and then how we responded as it emerged. As you heard from Jean, I started at St. Louis University July 1. I was new to St. Louis. I'd been there a time or two before, had not spent much time into it. So I'm just trying to learn the city. I'm trying to learn this university. And St. Louis University is a very big and complex institution. So, you know, I'm there, and everybody wants to meet you as president, and I'm trying to meet everybody internally and externally, and you know how it is. I met with this department, but not that department, and then I hear they're upset. I don't value them as much as this one, and then I met with this trustee, but not that trustee, and why did you meet with him or her? And so I'm just doing my best to figure out who's who. There's one television show my wife and I watch regularly. It's CBS Sunday Morning. We started doing that very early in our marriage. We got up on Sunday morning, August 10th, and we turn on the television to watch CBS Sunday Morning. And we hear about this terrible thing that's happened in Ferguson. We don't know where Ferguson is. I didn't realize that what I'm watching happened just 10 miles away from the campus, probably 6 or 7, 8 miles from where I live. But this Ferguson thing is terrible. What happened on Saturday, August 9th? What happened is, and I could talk a lot as a sociologist about the problems in St. Louis. What happened is we had a police officer, Darren Wilson, involved in an altercation with a young man, Michael Brown, in Ferguson, Missouri, which is in St. Louis County, not St. Louis City. And St. Louis City and county are politically separate, which is another story, part of the problem to my mind. Officer Wilson shot and killed Michael Brown. Michael was unarmed. Worse than that, in the minds of many, is because the Ferguson Police Department is not well-resourced and well-trained, to my mind, how that was treated was not best practices in terms of policing. Michael Brown, on a Saturday afternoon, his body was left uncovered in the street for 4.5 hours. So this dead young man, this body, this corpse, is there in the open. People can see it. His family, friends can see it and view it. They can't go near it because there's police tape. For 4.5 hours. It's defined by many in the community as the equivalent of a lynching. This young man is killed and his body is left there for all to view on a hot, sunny Saturday afternoon. There were riots in Ferguson that night. We're making now national and international news. So that's the context in the greater St. Louis area. We are the center of this. I was inaugurated on Friday, October 3rd. It was a wonderful ceremony. It was a terrific day. I love those events. It was a special display and celebration of St. Louis University. Friday, October 3rd. The following Wednesday, Drew Myers, Jr., Bondrett Myers Jr., another 18-year-old black male, was shot and killed by a white police officer in the Shaw neighborhood. Now, St. Louis University has basically 3 campuses in St. Louis. It has what we call the North Campus, where much of the undergraduate curriculum is. We have the South Campus, separated by about a mile or so, where the medical school is, the hospital, some of the health sciences. The South Campus, and they're about a mile apart on a street called Grand Avenue, the South Campus abuts the Shaw neighborhood. In the Shaw neighborhood, we have another shooting. Now, in that case, Drew Myers Jr. was armed. There was an exchange of gunfire, but he was killed in that exchange. And many did not buy the official story and believe that he was not armed, that in fact what he had in his hand was a sandwich he had recently purchased. So this is at least the narrative. So now on this Wednesday evening, just shortly after my inauguration, we now have protesting and rioting in Shaw right at the edge of the campus. So we've got 2 areas in St. Louis which are routinely experiencing these disruptions. So that's the environment in which we are operating on our campus. That's what we are facing. So that happened on Wednesday. It's now Sunday night. I'm asleep in bed, and it's approximately 1:30 in the morning. The phone rings. You know that's not going to be good, okay? You just know it's not. On the other end of the line is Jim Moran. Jim is a former St. Louis City police officer. Jim is the head of our public safety department. Jim informs me of the following. He said, there are protesters. They are moving up Grand Avenue. So they started out in the Shaw neighborhood where Drew Myers Jr. was killed. They are coming up Grand. And he said, we believe that they are about to turn on to the campus. There are about 1,000 of them. They are minutes away, and we begin to discuss scenarios. You want to show? This is what's happening coming up Grand Avenue. I'm in bed, just having woken up from the call with Jim, and this is what Jim's describing to me. So Jim says, I got to make a decision. I got to make a decision fast. Are we going to try to stop them from turning onto the campus, or are we going to allow them to come onto the campus? He's talking to the St. Louis police. He's talking to our police officers. I've got to make a decision. So I said, what do you recommend? What are the scenarios? What are the outcomes? Jim says, okay, on the one hand, we could try to stop them right here at Grand. We believe if we try to stop them here at Grand, it will be a violent confrontation. We can prevent them from getting on at Grand, but our campus is too porous. They're going to get onto the campus. I said, what do you think? He said, I'd let them on. He said, what do the St. Louis police think? They'd let them on. It's obvious. Let them on the campus, don't try to stop them. What would you do? I say let them on the campus. A lot of people were very angry that I made that decision and thought it was my first mistake. So we let them on to the campus. Now remember, I started my presidency July 1. I'm faced with this in the middle of the night on a Sunday evening. I don't even know who my congressperson is at this point. I'm just trying to meet all the departments and trustees and others and get through the upset for those I haven't met. I have no relationships, okay, unlike when I was in Syracuse at Lemoyne, unlike when I was in Dayton at the University of Dayton. I would have been able to call people. Help me out here. Give me some advice. Here's this. I don't even know who's who yet. And I've got to make these decisions, and I'm smart enough to know this is all high stakes right now, because something could go very, very wrong. So that's what's coming on to my campus. In that crowd is Von Dretmeyer's Sr. They march to the clock tower. He gives a very impassioned speech about the loss of his son. As they're coming onto campus, there were about 1,000 people, give or take, in that initial group. As you heard, one of our students is out there with his ID. I'm a SLU student, and these are my guests. You know, let them on the campus. So now, social media, residence halls right there, hundreds of students are pouring out of the residence halls. Some want to be part of it. Some want to know what's going on here. And others are angry, upset, confused, scared. A small group went into the library, encouraging them to come out. Some students responded to that and went out. Other students were terrified. What does this mean? Is my life, health, safety in jeopardy? People start calling their parents. We're on social media. Do you have a picture of the clock tower? That's what it looked like. That's our clock tower. This is where they ended up. And this picture is going, pictures like this, all out now. Okay? I've got the television on. I'm seeing at home what's going on my campus as I'm being called upon to make decisions in the midst of this crisis. And I know everybody, locally and beyond, is focused on this. So, my vice presidents are made aware of this. We're in constant contact with Jim Morand over the course of the evening. We had to put our faith in our students who are down there to keep it peaceful. We're praying that it stays peaceful. The number one concern, obviously, is that no one gets hurt. So I'm in touch with Jim over the course of the night, and slowly they're peeling off in groups of 25, 50, 75, but they have a discussion. What should we do next? Should we march someplace else, or should we just stay? And they come to a decision, they're going to stay. We did not anticipate that. We thought, you know, we're going to have this night of protest, and it's, of course, midterms week. So, you know, it's disrupting everything. The end of the week, we're going into a 4-day weekend. The next Monday and Tuesday, they would have off. And that clock tower is the most strategic position you could take for a demonstration on the campus. It was a very wise place to go to, because you can't go through that part of campus. That's right at the intersection of two main walkways. So they're right in the center there. They decide, a group of them, that they are going to stay. There's speeches overnight with megaphones. They get on social media and they ask for tents, food, water, and other things. And they get a very positive response. So Ferguson's been going on since August. These people are networked with each other. We're not starting anything new. And they give themselves a name, Occupy SLU. Immediately becomes one of the top Twitter hashtags in the country and in the world. In fact, for a day, we were the #1 trending site. So you can see we now have this encampment that has started on the campus, right there in the center, at the clock tower. And so Monday morning, it starts. Now we have not just protest, we've got an occupation. We've got tents, tables, chairs. And I go into the office, and exactly what you would expect to have happened has happened. The phones, our phone lines in every office are jammed up. We're getting calls left and right. And none of them are congratulatory calls. They're angry, and they're mad, and they want those protesters off campus now. People are worried about safety. People want to know why, as a private institution, we even let them on the campus. Well, not only are we getting phone calls, we've got the press all over us, we've got media all over us, we're getting emails, hate mails. We put all the staff we could find on the phones. And here's something that I didn't think much about. This was incredibly tough on the staff. Some of our staff are minority members, and some of these calls were very hateful, racist calls. And all I'm feeling is pressure. Pressure to end this. People are threatening to stop sending money. People are threatening to withdraw their children. People are threatening not to send their children. People are threatening all kinds of things. I'm a brand new president, and I know that my number one job is to protect the institution. I am driven to that. I'm the type of, I identify with the institution that I'm a part of or leading. I am now feeling the weight of the world here, and there is no script. When you go to president's school, they don't say, here's what you do when you're occupied. Here's the checklist, 1, 2. And I don't know anybody. I barely know who my vice presidents are. I'm serious. I don't know how we're going to face this crisis, but we set up a crisis room, the boardroom outside my office, and we get together and we start talking. And the path you want to go down first is, let's get them out. What do we have to do? How do we do this? If I give the order, who's coming in? How do we manage this? And I'm telling you, there's not only pressure to do that, I know that if I do that, I'll be celebrated for it among a section of these people who are calling me. I am getting calls from some very important, very wealthy, very well-known people. And they're not shy about exactly what they think I should do, and they want to know why I haven't done it already. So I'm meeting with my team. We've now set up a crisis management group, and we're discussing how to deal with this crisis. And we're moving down the wrong path. It's the path that an administrator would typically take, and it works in normal situations. What's the problem? How can it be most quickly resolved? Let's do it. Till we had to ask ourselves, what should we really be doing here? What are our values? We asked ourselves, what would Christ do? What would Ignatius do? What would Pope Francis do? What should we do? And those are the questions we're having. And it's not easy to get the space to have those conversations when the phone won't stop ringing, when the inbox is jammed up, when people are legitimately afraid for their son or daughter. At least you can understand their fear. When their sons and daughters are calling home and expressing concern. And then you've got some people out there are just nuts, okay? And they're calling too. So we're facing this tremendous pressure. And we decide we cannot at this time go down the path we were headed, which is to tell them to leave. They certainly would have responded no, and then forcibly remove them. We said we can't do this. We've got to take a different approach. The first day they're there, the first night they're there, they call for a teach-in at the clock tower, and there's an amphitheater there. Look at that picture there. There are 500 of our students with some faculty, staff, and Jesuits who gathered at the clock tower to be spoken to for a couple of hours through microphones by these very angry young men and women. So I went out there that night and I watched this take place. I went out there and I talked to some of the people who were part of the encampment, trying to understand what's going on. What are they angry about? What do they want here? And my vice presidents are assisting me in this effort, as are others. I talked to members of the black clergy that I quickly got plugged into. In fact, on Wednesday evening, we had 200 black Baptist ministers on campus. That had been planned long before. They happened to be there not far from the encampment. And many of them said, do you want us to go out there and talk to the protesters and see if we can help you here? I said, absolutely. They went out and they came back and said, you got no chance whatsoever. They did. It was very disheartening. They said, because there's a generational divide. They said, this isn't like the 60s. They don't feel a part of us. They don't feel that we understand their pain. They don't feel that we've been supportive of them. They don't want to talk to us. We'd go out there and ask basic questions. Who's in charge? We're all in charge. Try again. Who's in charge? None of us are in charge. Who's in charge? Christ is in charge. Okay? You can't get anywhere when you can't talk to some people and begin to find some common ground. Begin to figure out, how do you move toward a resolution? What do you want? We want to occupy your space. That's the line we got. Congratulations, you've done it. You're successful. Goal achieved. What do you want? We want you to understand white privilege, okay? We've heard you talk. You've told us. What do you want? What do you need? What can we do? So this is the week we're facing. With each day, there is more and more pressure on us to take action. We get very clear with the St. Louis Police Department what will action look like. They said, if we're going to come in, we're going to do it in the middle of the night. It's going to start with tear gas. Social media will be involved. There'll be hundreds, if not thousands, of people here on your campus. We don't expect it to be peaceful and easy. That's what you face. Now, if that's what you want, that's how it comes down from our perspective. We prefer you try to stay with the course you're on, which is try to engage these people and reach a solution that doesn't involve the forcible removal, the action that in some ways would be easy to give the order, but exactly contrary to our values. So the more we talked as a leadership team, the more we committed ourselves to staying the course of conversation. The more we committed ourselves to living our values, to try to engage these young people. One of the smartest things we did is to try to help with some of the pressure, because in the big scheme of things, it was a relatively small encampment, is we put up webcams to show. So when people are calling, saying things like, the campus is burning, you know, there's violence, you say, watch the webcams. You can see what's going on. Now, the protesters weren't helping me in a sense of, they came onto campus with the American flag flown upside down. That's a real hot button issue with many people, as you can imagine. And when they weren't getting enough attention, one of them took the flag and was dragging it in the dirt. Well, now we're following social media, and I'm getting increasingly worried, because you've got people who are counter to this protest movement saying, we're going to come there and show them teach them a lesson. And so, again, my primary thing is keep it safe, no violence. Let's see if this can play out and we can get to a good resolution. It's not going to be a good resolution if people come onto my campus intending to violently confront these protesters who are waving the flag in the dirt. And then on the other hand, we've got people who are sympathetic with the protesters say, no, we're coming to campus to show them how this is really done. And so we're thinking, with each passing day, there's a greater chance, more pressure, that something terrible is going to happen here. Now, some of them are our students, some of them are not our students. And it's interesting the moment you go through. One moment that I went through, it was Friday morning. I wake up, and on social media, now this is being played by people who don't think we're taking the right approach, You know, there's this young man, he's part of the occupation, and he's angry. And he's using the F word. And he's just shouting the F word. And now this is on social media out there, and this is further reinforcing all those who think I should be forcibly removing this young man who is not a student of mine, who is using the F word on my campus. And I myself am thinking, you know, darn it, this is what, you know, I'm letting here. I should just kick these people off the campus. And it's that first, you know, roll out of bed reaction to it. You want to just say, I'm going to solve this. This kid shouldn't be on the campus. He shouldn't be using this language. But then you got to calm down and say, okay, what do we need to do? What is the right thing to do overall in line with our values? A breakthrough moment came finally on Thursday. Remember, this starts Sunday night. It's Thursday. I was talking to one of our minority faculty members, Stephen Bradley's head of our African American Studies program. I'm talking to a lot of people. I said, how do we solve this? What do we do? How do we make a breakthrough here in communication? He sets up a meeting on Thursday, finally, with two of our African American students who are both members of our Black Student Alliance, but also this group called Tribex, that the others who were on campus who were not SLU students were members of Tribex. I've got two students, two African American faculty members. I've got a woman who walks in. She's a member of a relatively small local activist organization. She's a grandmother type. But it turns out she carries enormous weight with these young people who are down in the middle of the campus. Now, there's no way I could have known that. But, you know, who to talk to, her name's Ramona. No way I'd ever discovered Ramona. Again, I don't even know who my congressman is. But by talking to people, by staying calm enough, by engaging in networks, Stephen Bradley, the African American Studies chair, smart enough to figure out who I need to bring in and begin to talk to have some influence over what's going on down there at the clock tower. So I've now got a couple students, a couple minority faculty members, myself, the provost, the head of student development, Ramona Taylor Williams, and a member of the staff who had influence over these young people. And we start talking on Thursday. And I said, this has got to come to an end. We've got to make some progress here. You've occupied the campus, you've got attention, we need to bring this to a close, and we need to do it fast. And I knew it had to end that weekend, that 4-day weekend. So we talked, and they started indicating what it was that would please them. An example. We have at St. Louis University what we call the MLK Scholars, Martin Luther King Scholars. It was a scholarship program originally set up for African American students, but because of changes in the law, we could no longer target that scholarship specifically to African American students. We had to open it up. Well, of the entering class of SLU students this past fall, we had 40 MLK Scholars. Of the 40, only 4 were African Americans. That's a sore spot. You know, it's supposed to be MLK Scholars. It was initially set up to fund African American students, 4 out of 40. So one of the things we talked about is how can we increase our minority enrollment? How can we better target some of those dollars as they were initially intended? Special Assistant to the President for Diversity and Inclusion. Much of what we agreed to, we'd already been discussing. As soon as I got to the campus, I said, who's the Chief Diversity Officer? We don't have one. I said, that's a problem. We had a couple bias-related incidents the previous semester. I need someone who's going to be attending to these issues. So we'd already started down that path, getting a Chief Diversity Officer. We continue, we had a number of things in progress. So I talk about, here's things we're going to do. They said, here's additional things we want done. We talked Thursday, we came back Friday. We reached an agreement Friday afternoon. Now, we didn't even put dollars to it. We didn't put timelines to it. We just said, we're going to trust each other. But these are the things we're going to do. We created a list. They said, we want to stay one more night. I said, fine, stay one more night. You leave tomorrow morning. We'll do these things. We'll finalize them next week. That's how this will end. How am I doing, Mr. Fowler? Thank you. So, we conclude those conversations on Friday afternoon. And on Saturday, we get up and we gather, and that's the morning the encampment is supposed to end. Things never go as they're supposed to go. This is a pretty big thing now. We need a truck to get rid of the tents and the chairs and the food and the water. We have problems getting a truck there. So that's the first thing. But then there was a new wrinkle. A local activist attorney shows up. And he tells them, don't trust this guy. You don't know who he is. I wouldn't go anywhere. You don't have a signed, formal, finalized agreement. You don't have timelines. You don't have dollar signs. Stay right here. That was not a good thing for us. So I go down to the clock tower. We had some faculty down there. We sat and talked for about 40 minutes. And we said, we've got to trust each other. I said, this has to end. You know it has to end. I said, I've demonstrated this week through my actions that I've listened to you, I've supported you. My communications have been sympathetic to the pain you've shared, the issues you've raised. This cannot continue. He was arguing, stay right here. You don't know this man. He can't be trusted. So we talked. And then I left. And while we're talking, Ramona's breaking up the camp, which is a magnificent thing to see. You never know who's got influence, who to work with. But if you don't engage in these conversations, you're not going to find out. So I left, and the camp starts to come down, except for one very angry individual who said he wasn't leaving and his tent was staying. Ramona says, I can't do anything with him. He just won't listen to me. But his peers who had been out there worked with him and talked with him. And ultimately, he agreed to leave as well. So, on that Saturday afternoon, the encampment ended, and we began to go back to some sense of normalcy on the campus.
Kelly, School University President Pestello sent out an email this afternoon saying, yes, the encampment is over. It was right behind where I'm standing along these steps underneath the clock tower on campus. However, the conversations that were had here throughout the week, he said those will definitely continue.
So the most important thing that happened, though, is that was really the start. Now, I said we would meet with that group, which we now call the Access and Success Group, every couple of weeks to continue the conversations on what we ultimately came to call the Clock Tower Accords. But that's not the most important thing that happened. I would meet with various groups, including a particularly important meeting came with our Black Student Alliance and other groups. I met with a lot of student groups the last couple weeks of the term. And let me tell you what I heard any number of times. These changed the conversations we're having on campus. And I talked with mixed groups of students about how difficult it is to have these conversations. It's tough to talk about race. White students will say, I'm afraid. I'm afraid I'm going to say something wrong. I'm afraid I'm going to say something that's going to offend someone. Black students say, I'm tired of being the one black student in class and the professor looks to me and says, how do black people feel about this? So we heard a lot about insensitivity. insensitivity about each other, insensitivity about faculty, insensitivity about administration. But we were having conversations that we didn't have before. I had a number of students tell me that they were having conversations with their peers that they did not have before. I was having students tell me the conversations changed at home around the dining room table. It's funny, I met with parents group, I met with the Parents Association. They said, tell us how to talk to our children about this. I met with a group of students before Thanksgiving. They said, we're afraid to go home because mom and dad are going to say this and that, and we're going to have to tell them they're wrong. How do I talk to my parents? So we spent a lot of time talking about how do you talk to each other. I think the campus is enormously stronger for having engaged in these questions, for discussing issues that previously we did not bring to the surface. I think we're enormously stronger because it forced us to confront what are our values. How do we have to treat each other? Who are we here? Now, clearly part of it is self-selection. At SLU, like at John Carroll, like at Lemoyne, like at other Jesuit institutions, we attract students to us who are inclined in this direction. Students who want an education that certainly is rigorous, certainly stretches the mind, but also involves the development of the heart. But often, due to our day-to-day pressures and activities, we tend not to engage in these conversations, which are so critical to the issues certainly we're facing in St. Louis. But these problems are not unique to St. Louis. These are endemic social problems that exist throughout the country and to some extent throughout the world. And what the occupation did was force our hand, force us to take a course that caused us to have deep and meaningful discussions about what is the mission and values of this institution and how do we behave in line with them, as difficult as that is given the enormous pressures we were under, as uncomfortable it is when we're sitting down with each other and trying to have these conversations. I believe that St. Louis University is a different place today than it was when I started there a year ago. I believe that we are better for it. I don't believe we're finished. I think we're just starting. My wife and spouse and partner, whom I dearly love, has asked me several times over the course of the year, because this crisis has come up a couple of times, are you sorry that you took this on? It's been rough. That week of the occupation was the roughest professional week of my life. I'm not sorry for a minute. I am at a magnificent institution, much like this institution, with a noble cause. What that did was force us to be more of ourselves. So I'm thrilled to be at St. Louis University. I'm proud of how our students, how our staff, and how our faculty responded. I can tell you there are still some people who are angry with us, angry with me. I don't wish that were the case. I don't like making people angry. I like to be liked. But you have to do the right thing. And as we found, the right thing isn't necessarily the easy thing or the most obvious thing or the thing that all the pressure is on to do. So I thank you for this opportunity. I'm happy to answer any questions. A Lemoyne alum. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Tatiana. I'm a student here at John Carroll. I'm our Vice President of African American Alliance. My question for you, first, I apologize because half of those blankets were for me. And
Thank you for sending them.
I feel like that was a really big issue for you, but I was really into the Ferguson October movement, and I sent as much help as I could. Moving forward with what they asked and what you agreed to, what are your plans to implement change in campus, and how would you suggest that other campuses implement these changes as well?
Yeah, so we agreed to what we call the 13 clock tower accords. The progress we're making varies by the accord. I think the most important one that I'm trying to work on and hope to finalize over the next 2 weeks is the hire of the Special Assistant for Diversity and Community Engagement, so I can have somebody who can work on this full-time, because it's only part of what I can do. Some of them we've already achieved. One was increase the budget of the African American Studies program. That was easy and done. Others are going to take time to work through. And we're talking to other community partners. One is to develop a community center, and we've got 4 or 5 proposals. We need to weigh them and see. So we've accomplished some, others are in progress, but those are the start. We need to continue to talk about what comes next. How do we become an even better partner in the region? And that's the overall goal, I think, for us. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so very much for an outstanding, wonderful, informative afternoon. I'm Sister Juanita Shirley. I'm a sister of St. Joseph, Rocky River Drive, and I'm on our Social Justice Committee. And I'm representing all of the nuns on that committee. And one thing that I've always known, and that is that young people, all of you, you are the hope. And I see that all the time. And when I'm feeling very frustrated, I just look at you. And I just watch you. And I think about what they did on your campus. And Cleveland really needed to hear you, because we just had an awful thing with 2 people being gunned down with 100 bullets and more, and a little boy shot. We had the Cavaliers, so that helps. But you have given all of us more hope and joy, and God bless you. And I promise to put you in my will. That means I will always pray for you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
So you were faced with these protests and you, kind of the way that you just presented it, but what about campuses who are also facing protests and not addressing them? Would you have made these changes that you agreed to after the protests, and as a result of the protests, had you not been faced with them? And how should universities, our university, move forward without a protest as large as that to make it a pressing issue?
Yeah. So would we have done these things? Some of them we would have done. Some of them were underway. Because I was so focused on getting around to meet everyone, and because I was preparing for the inauguration and I put a lot of time into the inaugural address, which was very important to me, I thought it would define my presidency. And in it, I said there are 3 things I concluded that we have to do. 1, answer the question, what must we become, and develop a strategic plan. 2, we have to address the primary issue facing private higher education, which is the issue of affordability and indebtedness. And 3, we have to become an even better partner in the region than we are. And so we were moving down that path. I did not have time to spend a lot of time focused on that part. Would we have done all the things that came up there? Probably not. Eventually, I'm sure we would have gotten to them. But what emerged is, it was, you talk about life-changing. It was a life-changing experience for St. Louis University to go through this. And again, not everyone, and even among the student body, the faculty and staff, thinks we did a terrific job or did the right thing. But I think the vast majority of our campus thinks we pursued the right path and have grown for it and need to continue to grow. Every campus and every situation is different. And as I said, we were not headed initially down the path that we ultimately took, till we kind of checked ourselves and forced ourselves to slow down and respond differently than the way that many outside of the organization would have preferred we responded. But I'm so glad that we lived our values and followed our mission. Thank you. That was nice. Yeah.
If I could follow up on your last comment, and so in thinking about the challenges that we have as a society, how do we live our Jesuit Catholic mission in an authentic way when we have these intervening variables like race. So someone says Black Lives Matter, someone else says, well, white lives matter too. Well, of course, but that kind of statement is maybe not considered the stratification and the historical implications of Black life in the United States. So what do we say to our campuses and our communities about living the mission in an authentic way, such that we not only empathize, but we identify with the plight of those on the margins, if you
Yeah, I think those of us in leadership positions have to struggle with this question and raise the consciousness of our community. One of the many communications I sent out, and we sent out under Jeff's leadership a number of communications, and I can't tell you how many times I was thanked by parents, by students, by faculty and staff and others for communicating. You cannot communicate enough. But I try to be sensitive in those communications, and one in particular I wrote, I just told some of the stories I was hearing from these young people and others about going into a department store and being followed all the time, about, getting to SLU and having white people want to feel my hair, what that feels like to me. And I told a few of those stories like that in one of my communications. That was so powerful for the members of my campus. I had an African-American woman who is a janitor stop me and said, I called my children and grandchildren together and I read them that letter and I cried through it because somebody finally acknowledged what I feel every day. That's powerful. If we're not doing it here on our campuses, what are we doing? That's the difference this occupation made, as painful as it was in many ways. To understand the pain that we cause each other, to understand the pain that some of our brothers and sisters go through, to become more sensitive to that on our campuses. Yeah.
But in the same way, can you follow up with the discussion about the progress being made on those
Accords, clock tower accords.
How are you reporting, or is it over with?
Yeah, so at the beginning of the semester, I sent out a communication to the campus about our progress on those issues, and I will send periodic updates to the campus, because that's very important. Otherwise, people become cynical. So we agreed to them, and I think we have to do periodic updates. So I plan, again, when the campus reconvenes in the fall, to indicate, here's the progress we've made since I last communicated to you. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you for your talk. One of the things that your campus is well known for is its statuary. Lots of it. I guess is your predecessor. But one of the things I wonder is that I think I read that there was some discussion of how to potentially commemorate this in a permanent fashion on campus, the specific events. And then also a couple of weeks ago, the removal of a racially offensive statue of a Jesuit missionary to Native Americans named Father Spett, which has been removed. So I think it's very interesting also to hear about sort of the, you might say, the landmarking of your campus and how you commemorate all of it, or how you address that physically.
Yeah. Thank you for raising the question I hope would not come up here this afternoon. Do we have time, or are we... somebody want to give me a sign? So, and this plays directly off of Dr. Miller's question here. When I sent out my update in January, I just, here's the accords, which were public last October, and here's the progress we're making on them. Well, somebody picked up on the fact that one of the accords, one that I thought was, not controversial at all, is that we were going to create an artwork to commemorate what took place on the campus, to mark that moment. Well, that got picked up by some right-leaning blogs, and it went viral. And of course, you know, it's like the old game of telephone. It became anti-police statue. It's a statue of Michael Brown with his hands up. It's a statue of the Ferguson protesters looting a store. And, you know, this gets fed and blown up. So again, we'd gone through the crisis in October. In February, we're all over the media again, and all the hate mails and calls and, you know, how can you do this? And the first thing we had to do was try to get an accurate story out there as to what have we actually agreed to. First of all, we didn't, and we still don't have exactly a concept of what we're going to do. We've been discussing what we're going to do. It's not going to be anti-police. It's not going to be anything having to do with the actual protesters who were in Ferguson, okay? It was on our campus, and what we're talking about doing is something to commemorate the history of race relations and dialogue on the SLU campus. We're still talking to artists and working on it. But that caused another huge media thing in February. The most recent, and the one that is active now, is I've heard concerns from the time I started about one particular statue on our campus. It's a statue of Father De Smet, and it's a three-tier marble base. So Father De Smet, Jesuit missionary, is standing at the top, holding a cross with his hand out. Below him on the second tier would be a Native American Indian standing, and below him on the third tier is a Native American kneeling. And many find that racist, offensive. I've heard a lot of concern about it, and it's not far actually from the clock tower. So I thought, and again, you know, new president, I'm dealing with a lot of stuff. We just announced the repurchase and sale of our hospital. This involves hundreds of millions of dollars. So I'm not paying a lot of attention. I thought, let's take that statue, which people don't understand who De Smet is and his importance, and let's put it in context. So we have 3 or 4 museums on campus, depending on how you count them. The main museum is called SLUMA, St. Louis University Museum of Art. It is the 4th most highly ranked academic museum in the country. And on the 3rd floor, we have a Jesuit collection, including some artifacts from Father De Smet. So I thought, put the statue in the Jesuit collection and explain who he was, his importance, and so forth. It's out of context there. So I thought, just do that, you know, that was a quick thing. Well, again, that got into right-leaning blogs. Fox News, Fox and Friends did a piece on it. Fox website did a piece on it. Pat Buchanan has written an article on it. And again, I have a group of people who are not happy with me. Some of whom understood what we did. Others thought I just removed the statue, you know, and it's being defined as anti-white, anti-Christian, you know, so forth and so on. So it's again, and this is what keeps Jeff employed as the VP for Marketing and Communication. You know, let's make sure that we try to explain, you know, what has happened and so forth. So a lot of this, when we could talk about communication, is how do you even just get the facts out there? I'll tell you just an interesting tangent aside. We had Bob McCullough, the prosecutor in St. Louis County, where the Officer Wilson, the grand jury met and decided not to indict Officer Wilson. We had him come and speak on our campus at our law school. And I get back to my office after attending that, and calls are starting to pour in. And the calls are, you're flying a Black Panther flag above your law school. Okay? So the first thing you got to do is that true? You know, what are the facts? So we start trying to figure out who's seeing what where. It turns out it was an African American or Black History Month flag flying over City Hall, which is near the law school. But you don't want to go on the website and put up, we're not flying a Black Panther flag on the law school. But it's out there, you know? And so what do? You can only talk to the people who contact you. So in this day of social media, and I've heard the, you know, some of the leaders of the police departments in the area talk about this too. It's a new ball game with social media out there. what gets said, then it becomes real, then it becomes, you know, interpreted in different ways. It's hard to control. So thank you for raising the issue of the statues. Those are the two things.
Allow me to assure my colleagues here, I didn't learn of any of this from Fox News.
Okay.
The Chronicle of Higher Education.
Yeah, thank you.
And Jesuit friends of mine who posted the story and were glad that you did it.
Oh, thank you. And what we're trying to do is have people better understand Father DeSmet, and our Father Mike Barber, Dean of Law School in the Jesuits, and a Jesuit, and Dean of the Arts and Sciences, College of Arts and Sciences, has said that that statue really does not represent him well in what he stood for. He did not put himself above the Native Americans. He saw himself as part of and working with. And so the statue, out of context, is, but I understand, well, I understand why this has upset some people. I have done a lot of that this year. Yeah.
This may be the same kind of question as that, but I'm curious, how do you fix the MLK scholarship in the face of all this legislation and court cases against affirmative action?
I've got 2 lawyers in my law school working with my chief legal counsel who think we might be able to influence that in a way that would yield a higher percentage of minority students. What legally they're exactly doing, I don't know. But they're giving me confidence that we can do a better job than we've done in the past. I don't know the details of it. Yeah.
Throughout this conference, since we've been discussing humanitarian crises, first off, thank you for your presentation. It was really engaging. Looking at it through a humanitarian crisis context, we talked a lot about like psychosocial responses to people who have experienced trauma throughout events that maybe are a little bit different than what happened on the SLU campus. But at the same time, perhaps during the protests and everything, I know a few students who were engaged in protests off campus who were tear gassed, and perhaps students on campus were, grieving similar things that happened to Michael Brown and their own families and their friends and everything. And perhaps even students who were calling home saying that they were fearing their safety. So how did SLU deal with maybe like students' trauma during that time?
Yeah, that's a good question. Our Student Development Division in particular had an all-hands-on-deck effort to try to make themselves available individually and in groups to meet with students to talk about what was happening in the region and on our campus, and continued that effort. It was stressful for a number of people, and that's where the SLU community responded in a very generous way. We had people working around the clock. We set up phone bank rooms where faculty and staff were volunteering, even in the late night hours, because we attract students from across the country and the world to answer the phones, to try to reassure people, to direct them to the webcams, to talk about what was going on and try to provide facts, as contrary to some of the fantastic stories that were going on out there about what was happening. Thank you. How are we doing on time?
If you're willing to stay, we have time for a few more questions.
Okay, I'll tell you, if I like your question, we'll go. If not, we're out of time. Yeah, Chris.
I just have a question on the usage of crisis, and just in terms of what it means to occupy space and how things seem to be a crisis when space is being occupied, but if it's just like a day-to-day confrontation with racism or it's invisible racism, how it doesn't become an issue and how it doesn't stimulate the same type of response, and maybe if you have any insight on how to go about, making those critical issues that aren't really necessarily occupying space in a physical way, how to bring that into light in our campuses, communities, in our local communities, nationally, like how to go about doing that.
Yeah, it's a tough thing to do. I mean, that's where, as is often said, a crisis is often an opportunity. Short of the crisis, it's hard to get the space to get people to focus on this and to have these conversations. You have to have an institutional commitment to it. I don't think these problems that we've seen in St. Louis, in Cleveland, and in Baltimore are going away anytime soon. We've got some deep structural issues that we have to address. Here, we've got some issues, interpersonal interactions we need to address here. And I think as institutions, we've got to have the resolve to make it a priority. I'm sorry I can't give you a better answer than that. Yeah, Christopher.
So, yesterday in St. Louis, the U.S. bishops released a statement on race relations in the U.S. And but throughout the fall and into this year, some people have kind of wondered where the voice of the church was. And obviously in St. Louis, you're part of that voice, but some may know that more than others. Can you talk about kind of how you felt part of the church in responding to these realities, or maybe where you would have hoped there could have been more presence?
Yeah. I'll tell you what was very important to me, both in the church and the media. So after the occupation was successfully ended, as Jeff displayed on the screen, the Attorney General of the United States wrote me a letter directly congratulating me on how we lived our values and peacefully resolved the occupation. That was powerful and important. The bishop, the Archbishop of Syracuse, Archbishop Carlson, is co-chair of an interfaith partnership that wrote me a similar letter congratulating me and supporting me for the direction I took. My provincial, Ron Mercier, wrote me a letter that we put up on the website when we were under attack, because I was saying, here, first layperson here, the place has gone to hell. A Jesuit wouldn't have allowed this to happen. So to have the provincial come out and say, I fully support you, you're living the mission, to have the bishop support me. But also what was critical is the local paper, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and then the St. Louis Business Journals, both wrote editorials that were incredibly supportive at the beginning of the spring when we were going through this statue issue. The Post-Dispatch wrote, the next statue SLU puts up should be of Dr. Fred Pestello, and then went on to say why I was acting in exactly the way a college president should act in that situation. And the Business Journal did the same. It's enormously helpful as a new leader, an unknown leader in a community, and people were saying unkind things about me. The kinder would be, we hired this Yankee, liberal, non-Midwestern, communist, anti-this, that, and the other thing, and he's got to go. And so to have the bishop, the provincial, leaders of the media, and others support me was critically important when I was very vulnerable.
Yeah, just probably in line with that as well. I know St. Louis is a very Jesuit community as well. And I really like how you pointed out earlier that one of the key questions you had to ask as a leader, what would Christ do in that situation? And so I was just wondering, because being straying away from that conservative Catholic sort of notion, how are you able to justify your actions, being aware that there are other religious denominations within the campus, and how are you able to actually go on with that decision, having Christ lead you throughout the decision without actually stepping over that conservative Catholic notion? So I guess.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if I fully understand this. I don't see Christ as liberal or conservative. Was trying to discern how he would act. And I had others argue, well, look at what Christ did to the money changers in the temple. These are basically money changers. He would have kicked them out. So then we can get in an argument about what would Christ do. But I was surrounded by people where we were pretty much of one mind. This is what the right path to take. If it was Christ, if it was Ignatius, if it was Pope Francis here leading us, what would you do? And the thing was, we'd talk. We've got to find common ground. We've got to find a way to talk. We've got to understand a way to feel what they are about. And as long as they remain peaceful, they can stay. We've got to drive toward a resolution. What I also think was important is since then, our campus has not faced some of the turbulence that others have. And I think it's because we are talking and working together. Because we've developed these relationships, these bonds, this trust, and it needs to continue to grow, which is, back to Dr. Miller's point, that's why I don't think we can walk away from these accords. So, I have some people now who are writing me saying, okay, you know, you agreed to that, you got them off, just throw out those accords. Don't, you know, you don't have to honor them, because it was an illegitimate basis upon which they, I think that would be absolutely the worst possible thing to do. I think it would be a betrayal of what I stand for and what the institution stands for. Yeah.
I wonder if you feel, or if you see how this played out, and how your campus was chosen of the many, many potential institutions for this kind of thing to play out in St. Louis. As a grace, as a blessing, and as an opportunity not just to teach your students, obviously, but to teach the world.
Yeah, so that's how I define it now. I would not have in the midst, I would not have in the midst of the crisis. I have a very good friend from graduate school, I'll tell this story, who at the end of that week, when it was over, and he was following it very closely and encouraging me on the path we were at, he wrote my wife a short email saying, "I'd hate to see the Pestello liquor bill for this week." It was an intense week, and it was enormously stressful on all of us. I don't want to say I'm glad it happened, but I think we're better off for having had it happen. I'm proud and pleased that we are the university we are in St. Louis. St. Louis has some great universities. We're just a few miles from Washington University. It is one of the top-ranked universities in the country. I'm glad it's there. We benefit from it in many ways. But many people will tell me that we are St. Louis's university. We're much more part of the community. And I don't mean that as a slam against WashU. They are a fine research institution. But I'll tell you what somebody told me last fall. He said, and this is a person who served at one of our country's top institutions in a very high-level role. He said to me, "You are so fortunate." I said, "Okay, tell me why." He said, "Because you're at an institution that stands for something." He said, "All I could talk about at my institution," and he's recently retired, "was we stand for excellence." He said, "That's all I could say." He said, "I envy what you can say in terms of what you stand for at St. Louis University." And I thought, that's powerful coming from him. And that's what this brought home to us.
On that note, everybody, once again, late.
Thank you.
There is a coffee break out in the atrium, and for JUHAN folks and anybody else who's interested, we will start our breakout sessions at 3 p.m. Thank you.